Have you ever thought about what could happen if you're in your life if you were able to lean into and embrace your most uncomfortable emotions? And have you ever considered why life presents us with challenging situations, such as loss, betrayal, trauma, and major disappointments that often lead to grief, stress, confusion, uncertainty, and overwhelm? Today, our guest is going to help us understand and consider the transformational power of both forgiveness and our most uncomfortable emotions. If you have been feeling stuck and uncomfortable and you'd love to set yourself free, today's episode is dedicated to you. Welcome to C60 Health Connections, where we meet with leading experts who can help you elevate performance in all aspects of your life. Dr. Joan Rosenberg is with us today for our 5th episode in our mini-series on grief, designed to help you navigate challenging emotions and get back to living a life that you love. Joan is a PhD, psychologist, a best-selling author, corporate wellness consultant, and media expert who is known globally as an acclaimed speaker and trainer on communication, confidence, resilience, authenticity, and grief. As a 3-time TEDx speaker and member of the Association of Transformational Leaders, she has been recognized for her innovative emotional mastery / confidence building approach, and for her thought leadership and global influence in personal development. Dr. Rosenberg has served as a mental health media consultant for documentaries, print, radio, television, and numerous digital outlets. She is also a professor of psychology at Pepperdine University. My name is Jessica McNaughton, and I am the CEO at shopc60.com and C60 Purple Power. I'm a business executive with years of experience in corporate America, and for more than 20 years, I've been exploring various modalities in health, wellness, and spirituality. Now, before we get started today, any statements that we discuss or products discussed have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. Any products or topics discussed today are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, mitigate, or prevent any disease. Joan, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a treat to be here. Thank you so much.
Let's just dive right into it, Joan. I'd love it if you can tell us a little bit about your background, your life story, how you became an expert in helping people deal with uncomfortable emotions and, transforming their life through the power of forgiveness. These are really important topics today.
Yeah, well, we don't start from just doing that off the cuff. So it started from a place of not, I guess, if you will, from feeling wounded myself. Right. So I the story that I usually start with is that I started out really as a very young age. I was shy. I was sensitive. I was, and I'd like to say so shy, I was Velcro to the wall. You think of wallflowers. I was Velcro to the wall.
That's pretty cute.
And I was, obviously quite introverted. And I would be, when I was around my peers, I didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like I belonged. And it's an experience that many of us have, but that was kind of my trajectory in the beginning. And I was also bullied throughout my childhood and adolescence. Again, common experience, not news to many people, unfortunately. But it's I would look over at my peers and I would see them, and it was like they were hanging out, laughing, and this sense of belonging. And it was like, I want what they have. And so the first thing that I really tried to make sense of, it was like, so the perception was they had confidence, I didn't. So that became my first big search. It's like, well, how does somebody develop confidence? And then as I got into my professional life as a psychologist, a second question emerged for me. And that was what made it so difficult for people to deal with or handle unpleasant feelings. Because as much as I watched people struggle with how they thought and that would get in their way, all this negative self-talk, other kinds of things like that, or the beliefs that they held, I found that people who had difficulty with dealing with unpleasant feelings actually did not feel capable of handling life.
Wow, that's a pretty profound discovery.
So it felt that way. It didn't. I don't know that it felt that right. Yeah, I don't think it felt that way quite as big then, but that's what really, those two things kind of initiated my search. And as time went on, and I mean time meaning decades, what I was able to recognize is the answer to that second question about unpleasant feelings became the foundational answer, if you will, to what helps people develop confidence. So it all started from my own personal wounds, and then what I just became good at along the way. And I think there's two other things that kind of go into this. Not only was I an observer of other people's experience, I tried to become a good observer of my own experience. And so that combined with teaching really made a difference in terms of trying to pay attention to the things that made the biggest differences in people's lives.
So what transpired in your life that led you to pursue the path of forgiveness as a way to, work through the process of grief?
Well, it's actually, I would say, working through the process of grief actually leads to the forgiveness.
Okay.
I would go the other direction. That it's not forgiveness that leads to grief; it's grief that leads to forgiveness.
Okay.
Or the process of grieving that leads to forgiveness. I went same thing. I went through, in particular, there's 1 year that I reference, and it was in 2002 to 2003. I experienced 5 major losses that year, and I started out with a major surgery and ended that year with 5 losses. The last one, literally a year later, being the loss of my father. That was preceded by a relationship breakup, and that was preceded by the loss of my grandmother, plus loss of a couple other friends. So it was, I kind of rolled through that year, and it was like, whoa, this is way bigger than me. I got to make sense of what's going on here, and it was just a year of grieving. I was in tears, kind of frequently throughout the year. And so that was kind of one piece of it, but the other piece of it for me was also in understanding psychotherapy. Again, trying to be a good observer, what I realized is that if somebody stays in therapy for some period of time, what I realized is that psychotherapy is really a grieving process, and the outcome of that grief, of dealing with that grief, is the ability to kind of choose more of what you want in life, and dealing with the grief, or what I call making sense of life experiences, because that's what you do in therapy, is you make sense of particularly difficult life experiences. That the outcome, that the process of doing that in part was grieving, and that the outcome then led to people being able to choose more for how they wanted to create their life going forward. So it led to forgiveness, and then it led to this experience of I get to choose life.
That's a good place to be in, and that's ultimately like where we would all like to be. Maybe we should start back at the beginning of your work, where you talk about confidence, and then lead into the unpleasant feelings, and then go into grieving and forgiveness. So can you just help us define, like, how do you define confidence? Because it sounds like that was kind of like the first thing that you felt like you needed to address, the underlying kind of like root cause in just these feelings that didn't feel good in the first place.
Right. So the way I look at confidence at this point, or the foundational piece of confidence, because there are some major elements that go into it. But my definition of it is that it's the deep sense that you can handle the emotional outcome, and in this case, think unpleasant feelings. So the deep sense that you can handle the emotional outcome of whatever you face or whatever you pursue.
Okay, that's good. And then I understand that you have developed kind of a formula to help people deal with these difficult emotions, but you've also kind of defined and outlined what you teach as like the three feelings or emotional states that most people deal with that are uncomfortable. Is that correct?
Well, it's not. Yeah. The formula. A colleague called it the Rosenberg reset, and I was like, okay, that captured it. That sort
That's
of
cute.
I mean, yeah, I didn't. And so it's not my naming. So I just like, but I accepted it. I said, I'll receive that. Thank you. And so the way I think about it, so that it's easier for people to remember, is that I talk about it as a formula. So it's one choice, 8 feelings, 90 seconds.
One choice, 8 feelings, 90 seconds. Okay.
And I'll walk us through that. But as much as people dial into the 90 seconds, which is really the more centered around the method, as we go through this, I will tell you that the 8 feelings are really where the magic is. So what's the one choice? The one choice is awareness as opposed to avoidance. So what does that mean to be aware? It means being as aware of and in touch with as much of your moment-to-moment experience as possible. So what does avoidance look like? Well, avoidance looks like social media. It looks like screens. It looks like sex. It looks like food indulgence. It looks like any kind of addiction you want to put into play. More often for men than for women, it's porn. So, I mean, we can go on and on in terms of all the different kinds of things that distract us. So think of avoidance as anything that allows you to ignore, distract, disconnect, or suppress what's happening in your life. And that could include, interestingly enough, having feelings about having feelings.
Tell me more about that.
So I might feel angry that I'm sad.
Okay.
I might be disappointed that I'm angry.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I'm feeling the disappointment about being angry, I'm distracting from the anger.
So when you're judging yourself or
harsh self-criticism is also a distraction to me. Yes.
Okay. All
absolutely.
Right. That makes sense.
So the thing to understand here is that you don't want to be engaged in any of those avoidance behaviors. You want to be engaged in the kinds of things that allow you to stay present to what's taking place. So it's easier for most of us to handle pleasant feelings. So my work is dialed into the unpleasant ones because that's what's harder for people. And so in terms of the unpleasant feelings, so the one choice again is awareness. That's what I want people to lean into. The second is the 8 feelings. And so the 8 feelings are sadness, shame, helplessness, anger, vulnerability, embarrassment, disappointment, or frustration. I think that's all 8.
Okay. Would you just repeat them one more time? We'll pop them up here while you're doing that.
Sadness,
okay,
shame, helplessness, anger, vulnerability, embarrassment, disappointment, and frustration.
Okay.
So the big question here is why these 8? And it's these 8 because they're the most common everyday spontaneous reactions to things that happen that we don't want to experience, or either that don't turn out the way that we want, or that they don't turn out the way that we feel that they need to turn out for us. So it's really the everydayness of these feelings. And you can think about how frequently you experience them on a given day or a given week or a given month. Mm-hmm. Right? So they're really common.
So some people think that they believe these feelings might last weeks or months or years. Like what's your perspective on, the typical amount of time, or like if we had these tools, your Rosenberg reset, to process them quickly, like what's the expectation for how quickly we could move through that?
Well, so that's the 90 seconds piece. And the reality is that feelings are very, very transient. They're short-lived.
Kind of like the clouds in the sky.
Yeah, exactly. They keep moving. And so I think of it as the emotional equivalent of stubbing your toe, or the physical equivalent of stubbing your toe. The pain is there in the first moments. Yeah. And then, a couple minutes later, you don't even notice it. So that's true in general of, again, I would say everyday sorts of feelings. Now, if it's tied to something that is connected to trauma encodes in the brain differently. So that's going to be one way that something is going to have an experience of lasting longer. And I think there are other ways we engage with our experience that also make them feel like they last longer. So one we note is trauma encodes differently. So I'm not talking about traumatic experiences particularly here.
Okay.
Though some of this will work with trauma. If we try to act like what we're thinking about isn't there, I'm just not going to think about it, then that actually, oddly enough, makes us think about it more.
Wow.
Okay. So if I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, right? You think of a pink elephant. So you have to think about the thing you're going to tell yourself you're not going to think of. And so it's paradoxical. It doesn't work. And it actually makes you think of it more. So that's a second way. A third way is that you keep on repeating the thought or memory of what's going on. So, breakups are really common for this. Yep. So, what's she doing? What's he doing? And, we were doing this at this time. But every time you activate the memory or the thought, you're activating everything that comes with that. And that's all the feeling. So now it feels like it's lingering because you keep on repeating those same thoughts or memories. And then the last way that I think that this stuff stays present or feels like it lingers is that you engage in harsh self-criticism, because harsh self-criticism just keeps activating the same unpleasant feelings underneath. So now they feel like they're lingering as opposed to going away. So those are ways that it feels like it sticks around. But if we circle back then, excuse me, to the kind of the method, if you will, for staying present to the feeling or leaning into the feeling, it's to have an understanding, a couple of different things that lead into it. One, it's to understand we're one interconnected whole. The body is always feeding information to the brain, and the brain is always feeding information to the body. So we're not separate beings. It's like this head on a stick kind of thing. It's not the way it works. So the second part of that is to understand that most of us come to know what we're feeling emotionally through bodily sensation. Now, that's not something most of us think about. But for instance, I always use the example of embarrassment, you would see the redness in my face. I would feel the heat of that bodily sensation.
Yeah, or I think about a time where I'm not saying you, I'm saying me. I think about a time being in a relationship with somebody where it was out of integrity, and I just would have like a kind of like a sick feeling in my stomach, but I could never kind of identify why. But I always just had like a pit there, and I couldn't figure it out.
Right. So the pit is the emotional reaction, mm-hmm. Right? So part of it is learning to then identify. Again, and you can always start with those 8 feelings that I named. You can learn to identify kind of how, what, and where you feel it in your body. And it's understanding then that what ends up happening is that when a feeling does get triggered, that Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor is the one that kind of called out the 90 seconds. So it's not my 90 seconds. I'm just making use of it. So the idea here is that when a feeling gets triggered, there's a rush of biochemicals into the body, into the bloodstream, actually, that actually activate those bodily sensations. And those same biochemicals flush out of the bloodstream in roughly an upper limit of 90 seconds. So what we're talking about then, in my mind, this is what kind of helped me kind of coalesce this whole thing, I was always telling people to ride the waves, but I wasn't understanding that I was actually asking people to ride these bodily sensation waves. So that if you can lean into the discomfort of whatever the unpleasant feeling bodily sensation is, these short-lived bodily sensation waves that are helping you know what you're feeling emotionally, then you can lean into a feeling, or you can lean into all the unpleasant feelings, and you can stay present to them, and then they subside. Again, if we're going through grief or other processes that take longer, it's understanding you're going to ride multiple waves.
So let's say the feeling comes and it hits you, and it's either an actual physical pain in your heart because you're grieving and you're missing your person, or it's a sense of maybe a feeling of anxiety, where you just kind of like a tightening in your chest, and you kind of feel like a little bit of panic because you realize that person's gone and you're not going to see them again. Or, you've got that sick feeling in your stomach because you're really nervous about something. Maybe you're not very, confident. Like, let's say the minute that you start to feel this, will you talk us through what do you need to do? Is there a particular breathing technique within that 90 seconds, or are you just going to let your body feel it for 90 seconds and just embrace the experience for that amount of time? Just talk us through like exactly what do we need to do here?
And I would say in these kind of cases, especially where we're talking about especially if we're talking about something that happened acutely or it's traumatic, there's going to be a different process. I mean, it's not that the overall bodily experience changes dramatically, but it's understanding that we're going to have to stay present in some cases to spontaneous reactions that we have no control over.
Yeah.
So when there is deep and profound grief, and it is it's a profound loss, it's an acute loss, it's a traumatic loss, then there's going to be there's many times there's this spontaneous grieving reaction that just comes out of nowhere, or feels like it comes out of nowhere, and you're in tears. Right? So what do you have to, you just have to use, in this case, my thing is you breathe into it. You take deep breaths and you breathe right into the experience, and you let the experience move through you. It's not a matter of trying to shut it down. It's like, you're grieving. Okay, then that is what's happening. And it's like, let it be okay that is exactly where you are. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's health is the appropriate reaction to something in a given situation, right? So if you've just lost somebody important to you, then that means sadness, and sadness might mean grief, and grief might mean tears. Well, that's all totally normal. Just lean into the normalcy of whatever that experience is.
So it sounds like the big lesson or takeaway here is not to avoid it. So when you feel those feelings, let yourself go through them, have the tears, have the moment, even if it's at a time that's you think is not appropriate or socially acceptable, or it's not ideal for you. You go through it and you feel it, rather than calling your doctor and saying, hey, can I get something to numb myself out, or, utilizing any kind of, drugs or drinking, or just like you said, distraction with the social media or the shopping or porn or any of that other stuff, and just literally feel the feelings.
Exactly. So, and if you need to step away from a situation, step away from the situation. So the process that I think of in terms of actually literally staying present, one is to have this kind of cognitive understanding of what's taking place. The second part of it is okay, in this case, you breathe into the experience, you notice you're having a reaction to something, you breathe into the experience so that you let yourself stay present to it, kind of pause, be in it. So if you're tearful, be tearful, or if you need to step away from a situation so that you can go be tearful, or that you cue yourself that you're going to come back to it, that you're going to allow yourself, okay, this isn't the time or place, but I got to pay attention to what's going on. I'm going to make some time for myself to deal with this later, right? So and then you come back to it. And then, so it's kind of breathing. The second is kind of pausing so that you're in the experience itself. And the deeper breathing is actually going to help you experience it. When we shut down on breath, we shut down on the experience. When we stop ourselves from breathing, we're actually stopping the experience. And so you breathe, you stay in the experience by pausing, and then you can reflect. You can ask yourself, gee, what triggered this? What was it that kind of elicited my reaction? Gee, is there any pattern to what I'm going through here? What can I take from what's going on? And to your an earlier kind of question that you raised is like, what do you do with it? Well, I'll give you an example that I've talked with a close friend about is that and to others is that, for instance, let's say I'm angry about something. Then that's my reaction. I'm aware that I'm angry. You can use anger to motivate you to go towards a situation. So let's say that I realize I need to set better boundaries at work, that I'm being asked to do some things that are really out of my purview, and it doesn't fit my responsibilities. And I'm angry. So I can use that anger to get me to that conversation with my boss. It's like, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to set this boundary. And So now the anger has been kind of my jet fuel to get to the conversation. Or I can not only use that anger as the jet fuel to the conversation, I can also use it in the conversation. So I can then look at my boss and say, so not only did I let it help me get there, now I'm going to say to the boss, you know what, this is actually not okay. I realize that I am angry about me being asked to be handling this situation of responsibility without adequate resources to be able to make that happen, or it's out of my purview, or whatever it is. So you can make use of feeling by getting you to a conversation, or you can make use of the feeling in the conversation, or both.
I like that, utilizing that anger as kind of spiritual rocket fuel to take some action and be proactive. And that probably leads back to the confidence piece.
Well, in two ways. One is, when my experience is that when someone, if someone's been cut off or tried to ignore what their real experience is, and they allow themselves to stay more present to it, there is actually a fairly immediate organic or natural lift up, so that one feels better because now they're actually living the truth of who they are.
Okay, so that sounds like that's important, like an important reason why people should be encouraged to speak up or be assertive, because they're going to get some kind of like lift or some kind of relief in almost an immediate timeline.
Yeah, well, speaking up is really the to me, it's the super glue to confidence.
Okay.
So I want to dial one thing back to our conversation about feelings before that's lost. And then if you want to move into speaking up, I'm happy to go that route, because to me that's the single most important way to develop confidence, and it has a huge impact on kind of how we see ourselves in life. Plus, I mean, it's the magic piece. The one thing that I want to highlight for people around the unpleasant feelings in particular is that what I realized in this whole process is that it's not that we don't want to feel the whole range of what we feel. I really believe we do. It's that we don't want to feel the discomfort of the bodily sensations that help us know what we feel. And that's why people move away from unpleasant feelings. So the reality is if you can lean into these unpleasant, these uncomfortable or unsettling bodily sensations that help you know what you're feeling emotionally, and you can ride these bodily sensation waves, then you can stay fully present to the feeling and make your way through it and actually do great. So
that's really interesting. Now, before we go back to the confidence piece, I'm not sure I totally understand the 90-second component. So could you just break that down for us in terms of like?
Yeah, the 90-second component is just understanding that feelings are short-lived. The feelings bodily sensation is short-lived.
Okay.
So, when I would tell people that, again, I was asking people to kind of ride these waves, I didn't have a time limit set to it. They're afraid it's going to last a long time or it's never going to go away. It goes away. Feelings are short-lived. So what the key here is just understanding that any given feeling, any given bodily sensation wave is going to be a short-lived wave unless you keep on repeating it or doing some of the other things we talked about to shut it down.
Yeah. So then when you go back and you have those thoughts again, then you're creating that scenario and it's coming back. So
exactly.
I like that because there's hope there, like you are more empowered to create or facilitate the experience that you're having once you have the awareness of exactly what the thoughts are doing and the connection to the body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And again, it's understanding that the reason we don't like feelings is because we don't like the bodily sensation waves that help us know them. And that if we have when I told this to a client many years ago, I loved her response. I said, look, you have to lean into the bodily sensations that it had to do with being disappointed. She hated being disappointed. And so what I said to her is, look, we're talking about 90-second waves. And she looks at me and she goes, well, that's less than half a song. I said, yeah, great. Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's less than half a song. You can lean into this and handle it. And most of the time when I talk about under 90 seconds, people go, well, I can do 90 seconds.
Yeah.
Right. So it's totally empowering.
It's good. So you have the anxiety, but just breathe. And
well, I'm not a big fan of anxiety, so I have this whole other thing around anxiety.
Okay. Should we talk about that or just keep
that one's up to you? I'll follow your lead.
Well, I think it's a fairly common emotion and feeling that people are feeling right now. There's a lot of uncertainty, ambiguity, chaos and stress out there. And it's ever changing. Like it's constant for all of us, and we're getting lots of new information and things removed and taken away and stuff like that. So if you have some, and I do believe anxiety comes along with the grief. Like I said, when you're thinking about the fact that your person's no longer here and you're trying to deal with that, and you're just trying to accept the reality of that. If you have some secrets for best practices for navigating anxiety, like I'm all ears. I'd love to hear what those tips are.
Stop using the word fear and stop using the word anxiety.
Okay. Give us some new language, if you will.
Vulnerability.
Okay.
But I want people to understand I'm not trying to be dismissive here. Is there legitimate fear? Heck yes. Do I want to take fear away from you? Nope. If you're in a situation where and think of fear as danger in the moment right now, then if you're in a situation where you're fearful, then I absolutely want you to have the fear response, which is the stress reaction, fight, flight. You're into fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And so is that important? Heck yes.
Okay.
If you're not in danger in the moment right now, stop using the word fear because it activates the state. Words have vibrations. They activate states.
Okay. So for the people that get the tightness in the chest.
So let's consider that anxiety. We can consider that fear and anxiety, but if they're not in danger in the moment right now.
Nope. Let's say it just hits you out of nowhere. You're going about your day, and all of a sudden you get like what I would describe as a panic attack. So let's talk about how to deal and process when that feeling comes up, because for a lot of people that is very overwhelming and there quickly many people would look for what you would call as the distraction tools to get away from that feeling. So what's the secret sauce to embracing that really uncomfortable feeling of anxiety?
So let's talk about anxiety first, and let me take you to the other part. So fear is danger in the moment right now.
Okay.
Anxiety, psychology would describe it as diffuse concern or diffuse apprehension about some kind of negative event happening in the future.
So it's about the future. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Anxiety is about the future.
Okay.
So most of the other feelings are related to the past.
Okay.
Anxiety is about the future. So does it fit to say you're anxious? Yes, it fits. Except if I were to ask 10 people what anxiety meant to them, I would get 8 to 10 different answers. It frankly is of no use to me as a concept. And I think that most of the time when people feel anxious, they're feeling vulnerable.
Okay.
Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time when they're using the word, they're actually describing vulnerability. And vulnerability for me is the sense that you could be hurt.
So if you are afraid, if you're fearful of being hurt in the future,
right,
and your body is producing feelings, sensations that are related to that,
then you're probably feeling vulnerable. So are we living in a vulnerable time? Yes. Mm-hmm. More vulnerable than ever. Mm-hmm. Whether it was relative to the pandemic or whether in the United States, whether it's relative to the craziness about shootings. Right? It doesn't. We're living in a time where there's more obvious conscious threat. So we're most people when they're describing being more anxious, I think that what's happening is that people are having they're having a heightened experience of vulnerability without being aware that that's actually what's going on. And so what I would want to say is change it to increase your awareness, because both things are true. Is there more risk? Yeah, there probably is more risk.
Mm-hmm.
So we're literally feeling more vulnerable, but be aware that that's also what you're experiencing. Is that you not only have a heightened sense of vulnerability, you have a heightened awareness of that sense of vulnerability. And both are important. Not just to have the heightened sense of it, but to have a heightened awareness that that is what you're going through.
So what's the path forward from my healthy mental health perspective?
Well, if there are certain things that need to come out of your heightened awareness in terms of changing up that level of risk, then you make decisions specific to that. But if you're actually safe and you're just increasing that have that increased sense of vulnerability, then I would say use that kind of an awareness to make clearer choices in life. So an example that you and I just talked about right before we started to record this had to do with what the choices you made after you had a major loss in your life.
Correct.
Your level of vulnerability changed. It was like, whoa, life goes at any point, right? And now what did that lead you to do? It led you to make different life choices because you had a heightened awareness.
Yeah, that is very true.
Right? Yep. So once we have a heightened awareness of vulnerability, or we live with a low level of that heightened awareness, sounds paradoxical, I know. So living with a low level awareness of vulnerability can actually lead you to go, how do I want to live my life today?
Yeah, and I would say just to kind of bring this all together, what I shared with Joan was that after my father passed several years ago, my entire life changed, and a lot of things in my life had to fall away. And I've mentioned this on other episodes before, but to your point, Joan, it was about making different choices. There were relationships in my life that weren't supportive to me, and when I was feeling that sense of anxiety or overwhelm, or just I was grief stricken, I realized that those relationships weren't going to be productive for me in the future. And up until that point, I really hadn't been hit like with such a serious situation that I needed to rely on other people. But at that point in my time, that point in my life, everything changed. And everything that wasn't super supportive, I just didn't have the bandwidth to accept or tolerate it anymore. And that's when everything shifted. So I would say now, like thinking about this and, going through this with you, that period, which I did feel, anxious and stuff like that, that it ended up being very a powerful and transformative experience by going through those feelings, having the awareness of what was happening with me, what were the circumstances, people, places, situations that were contributing to those feelings, and then realizing, like you said, that I had a choice to do something different, and my life could be different if I didn't associate with those situations anymore.
Right. And so the key here is you stayed present throughout, and you were taking the insights that come along with staying present to feelings. You don't get those insights until you move through the feeling.
That's true. Yeah.
Staying present to the feelings led you to the insights, led you to the decisions. Mm-hmm. So it's great.
Thank you.
That's how it works. And that's how it works.
Okay. I get it now. All right. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. I want to kind of go back to your original core insight about confidence. So talk to us a little bit. How does we a few minutes ago we talked about people are always being encouraged to speak up or be assertive, and so I'm just curious. Can you tell us a little bit more about how does that actual act of speaking up help people to develop self-confidence and get, like what you said, that lift or that relief that they're needing to have in the moment in order to move forward through these uncomfortable emotions?
Well, think of the unpleasant feelings as the foundational piece of confidence. When I have the sense of myself as being able to handle the emotional outcome of whatever I face or whatever I pursue, then that's going to create, not only will it be the first step into confidence, it also provides that organic lift I was talking about, because now you are living more true to who you really are. And what people will often describe as they move through this whole process is that they feel more comfortable in their own skin. Well, that's what it should lead to, that you're actually more fully true to you.
That makes sense.
But we're not true to ourselves completely until we're sort of telling the truth of who we are, which means describing our experience, which means using our voice. And I wish I could do a study. I'm sure that I could. I just have to enlist a lot of people because I actually think our capacity, our speaking up actually changes our chemistry. I really do. I think it changes our molecules and really even more deeply changes the sense of who we are. And the impact is so profound. So to me, this is the real game changer. And if my work weren't centered on the 8 unpleasant feelings, it absolutely would be centered on speaking up. And at least this body of my work. And so a couple different things. It's not even that we know ourselves and then we speak, or we're confident and then we speak. It doesn't work that way. It's actually through the speaking and as we speak that we gain the confidence.
Okay.
So it's a little bit paradoxical. It's counterintuitive. And that's true. So if I layer another one in, I'm just going to sneak it in here, that's also true for taking action. It's not that we're confident and we go take a risk or take action. It's the other way around. We take the action, we take the risk, and then we develop the confidence.
That's great. So does speaking up also help you be perceived as more authentic with others, or how does it help with your ability to relate with others?
Absolutely. So again, I'm going to take us back one and then go with your question. I want people to understand that the difficulty speaking up is not a speaking problem.
What is it?
It's a difficulty with unpleasant feeling problem.
Okay. It all goes back to those feelings, and you want to avoid those uncomfortable feelings.
Exactly. You want to avoid your own, so you don't say anything, and you want to avoid somebody else's, because that's what a conversation entails. So you don't say anything. Difficulty speaking up it's all about dealing with the discomfort of your unpleasant feelings or the discomfort of someone else's unpleasant feelings simultaneously. So the authenticity piece is that until your thoughts, feelings, words, and actions match, you're not being congruent. So you're not being authentic. So if you're having certain thoughts and feelings and you're not conveying them appropriately in situations where they ought to be conveyed, then you're not being authentic. So your authenticity comes when those 4 things match. Plus, but at least those 4.
How can that impact relationships?
Profoundly. In your case, you were saying these people don't belong in my life.
Right.
In other cases, I might love somebody or want to spend more time with someone because I have such a great time with them and want to love them, that I'm going to let myself, again, vulnerability is one of the 8. I'm going to let myself be vulnerable. And again, in this case, it goes the pleasant direction, but it's going, hey, I want to spend time with you. I think you're really cool. Can we hang out more?
Yeah.
So now I'm being vulnerable, but I'm also being authentic. I'm being true to myself. I'm conveying it to you. And now we're getting closer because I was willing to take that risk. And now my life feels enriched, or your life feels enriched because we've done that.
Yeah.
But it all comes with speaking up. So speaking up. So here's the way I look at this body of work of mine. One is that to deal with the emotions the unpleasant feelings leads someone to feel emotionally liberated and more capable in life. To be able to use your voice, limitless possibility and limitless opportunity.
I think you should repeat that for us just one more time.
Both parts.
The part about what does that mean?
But to be able to experience and move through unpleasant feelings not only leads you to feel emotionally liberated and more capable of living life or dealing with life.
But then the result is,
and when you can speak up, then your capacity to speak up, either to ask or to tell, leads you to an experience of either limitless opportunity or limitless possibility.
that is Really beautiful and very profound. So I think that if we're not done with our conversation, but if there was one big takeaway today, like I think that is such a nugget of knowledge and, just gold for us to really kind of consider and think about like what's possible here. Yeah. With the embracing of these uncomfortable emotions.
Right.
So can we talk a little bit about the harsh criticism and self-criticism and judgment? Because earlier in the conversation, you shared that the self-judging could be a distraction technique. So
I wouldn't say could be, I would say is.
It is? Okay. All right.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
As much as a harsh self-criticism, people will talk about that as a problem. And it is. I'm not going to dismiss that. I don't think of it as a problem. I think of it as a distraction, and distraction is the problem.
Okay. So what's your take on how do you, if you're somebody who does a lot of self-judging, how do you start to coach yourself, catch yourself, move out of that?
I think initially what I would say is to try to match it with something positive, but people find that kind of difficult.
Yeah.
So my thing really is, the first is to understand, at least in my world, that harsh self-criticism, one, is not in any way equal to or equivalent to unpleasant feelings. They are not equal. One is destructive, the other is not. So harsh self-criticism is highly self-destructive.
Okay.
And I think is one of the most damaging things you can do to yourself. Strong statement, but I absolutely believe it. The second is to see harsh self-criticism as a distraction. So that when you start to engage in harsh self-criticism, then you are distracting yourself from something probably that's unpleasant, that has unpleasant feelings attached to, that's underneath. I'll give you a very quick example. It's the one I use all the time, but I was doing an interview akin to what we're doing today, and the person on the other end could not hear me, but I could hear him. And now he's fumbling on the keyboard to try to figure it out. And then I see him crawling under the desk to start to play with the chords. So you can get the picture of what's taking place.
There was a tech issue, Joan.
Right. Whatever it is, right? But he's trying to figure it out. And his minutes are going by. I'm cool. I'm just chilling and waiting. But I hear him say, "I'm so embarrassed." But without missing a beat, he goes, "I'm so stupid. I'm such an idiot."
Oh.
Didn't call for that.
Yeah.
But that's how quickly it happens for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So the "I'm so stupid, I'm such an idiot" was the distraction from the experience of embarrassment.
That's a really good example.
Right? Yeah. So that's what I watch people do. So how do you change it? Yeah. You notice when you engage in harsh self-criticism and you stop yourself and go, let's take this in reverse. What was going on right before this that was harder for me to think, know, feel, or bear? And it'll probably lead you to an unpleasant feeling you didn't want to have. And just, how do you handle it? Well, one choice, 8 feelings, 90 seconds. You just lean right into that feeling and go, all right, I didn't want to feel it. What's going on? Okay, I'm disappointed, or I'm angry, or whatever. So, and actually this takes me back to anxiety. So I'm going to take a backwards leap for a moment, if you bear with me. And that is the anxiety piece, is that if it's not vulnerability, it's one or more of the 8 feelings, or the other 7 feelings.
Okay.
So that vulnerability is the most common, but if the pit in the stomach is potentially anger, right, or sadness, or something else, instead of what it, so that you're not wanting to feel it, you keep it vague by calling it anxiety as opposed to calling it what it really is,
or even shame. Yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. One of the things when we first started talking at the top of this conversation, when you were sharing about your protocol and that your client had named your protocol the Rosenberg Reset, what I really appreciated was that you're like, hey, it's my name and I didn't do it, but I'll take it. So you said, like, thank you, like, to him pretty graciously. And, on the other side of the harsh criticism, there is, this positive self-talk or even compliments that people give us. And I'm thinking that you probably were very complimented when your client named this after you, and it was easy and it was sticky. But why do so many people have a hard time with compliments, and why do we push them away? Because you're telling us it's really important to have positive language to ourselves and not have this negative self-talk. But I would think it also starts with what do other people give us? How can we be more receptive?
Well, we make the decision to be more receptive. So that's the first thing. It's like, okay, I'm going to change this up. We're socialized to not accept compliments. You'll get a big head. You won't even be able to walk in the door, right? Don't get a big ego. You're going to be conceited. You're going to be whatever it is, right? And so we get socialized over and over, whether it's faith practices or cultural idioms, whatever it is, we get socialized to not take them in. Mm-hmm. Except I think that comes at a real cost, and I don't think people really understand the importance of them. So one key element here is that you end harsh self-criticism. The other key is that you begin to receive compliments. And so people are going to, well, what if I take them in? I'm going to get too much of a big head. My ego is going to get too big. And the interesting thing here is the answer for me on that one is no. That actually is not going to happen. So what I watch happen, so that I can kind of make some distinctions here, is that when somebody is telling you 17 or 25 different times how great they are, that's what we might call arrogance or conceit. And arrogance and conceit is just exactly the opposite of that. They're telling you over and over how great they are because they're not feeling it. So think of anybody that kind of boasts in that way excessively as somebody who is actually feeling the opposite. There's a sense of inadequacy, or there is a sense of insecurity or whatever, and that's where it's coming from.
How can we help people who we notice are doing something like that?
Well, I'm not sure I necessarily want to step in on that one. So if it's somebody that's close to you, then you say, what's really going on that you feel like you have to repeat this to me or tell me over and over that this is true. But so for me, the arrogance conceit piece is different than what it looks.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right. But if you tell me that you're really good at something, like let's say you say you're a really good interviewer, and maybe you say that to me once or twice, or maybe even up to 3 times. It's like, okay, got it. Thanks. Now I know that. Or that you're a really great tennis player, or you're a good singer or piano. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
You tell me once or twice, it's like, great. You have a good sense of your own skill and you're telling the truth about yourself. That's important. It's important for you to be able to go, I own this. I do this well. And that's it. But what happens when you can own something and you do it well, you don't have to tell people over and over. You do what I call live the good. Mm-hmm. So if you're living the good, then you exude it. You don't have to tell people. They already know it.
Yes.
They have that experience of you in that way. Does that make sense?
100%.
So then the compliments, the way to understand compliments is that compliments don't come out of the blue. They're not out of the ether or out of some vacuum, nor are they typically false. They're coming out of an experience of you or with you. So they're a reflection of you back to you.
So for people,
it's holding up a mirror to you.
Mm-hmm. So for people who struggle with it, any advice on best ways to respond is just thank you. If you're truly like uncomfortable and taking it, you're like, oh no, don't need to say that. Like, is the best is if you want to start practicing accepting them, should you just say thank you and leave it at that? Or
You know what, I'll say thank you, and I'll add one that I added it in today. It was a recent learning for me, but I like it. And that is, again, one is to notice what's causing you the discomfort. Sometimes it's just you feel more vulnerable, so you don't want to take it in.
so it's back to these 8 feelings. Back to the okay.
Potentially. Again, there might be other things that are making it so you don't want to take it in. But so the first, I would say, if you're pushing them away, notice your tendency to push them away and make sense of that. But the other would be 2 things. One is to say, thank you, I received that.
I received that. Thank you. Okay. I like that.
And then to take some time to let yourself absorb it later.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joan.
You're welcome.
We'll receive that.
Awesome.
Very cool. I know that you believe people can learn to be more resilient. And I think that is something that we could all benefit from during these challenging, uncertain times. So what do you think it takes for each of us to develop or deepen our ability to feel or operate with resiliency in our life?
The first thing is to understand that resilience is learnable.
Okay.
If that's a word. We can learn it.
All right.
And I think of it, in some cases, I think of it as a little bit skill-based from the standpoint of developing kind of a lot of the mental attitudes or beliefs that kind of go into it. So, and that takes some practice. But I mean, so let me walk through a number of different things that I think comprise it. And there's a long selection list that I think that goes with this. The first is being able to handle unpleasant feelings. A second would be being able to ask for help. So asking for help actually contributes to your resilience. Not a burden. It's actually a compliment to others. So asking for help is a second big one. And those 2 combined, being able to handle the unpleasant feelings and being able to ask for help, to me, comprise emotional strength. Then we can add on, again, a sense of community. We can add in all the different kinds of health practices, sleep, sunlight, supplements,
Fresh
exercise,
air.
right?
Yeah.
We can go on for those kinds of things that help us be more resilient. So all the basics. And then we go on to kind of the attitudes and beliefs you hold. So, and this to me gets at what I call resilient thinking. So you can hold certain kinds of attitudes and beliefs that make a difference, and you can ask yourself certain kinds of questions that also make a difference. And so what would the attitudes and beliefs look like? I'm going to take every life experience and turn it into a learning experience. That's a great attitude.
That's solid. Yeah.
Right? That's a great resilient attitude or belief to hold. Or I've persevered through difficult circumstances in the past. I can do this again. Right? Same kind of thing. It's now I'm drawing from past experiences. And so those are just 2 examples of kinds of attitudes and beliefs you can hold. And again, I would choose what's relevant for you in terms of the kind of thing that's going to help you stay strong in the face of adverse circumstances, or to persist through something that is hard. And then you can also ask what I call resilient questions. And so resilient questions, so the one through the pandemic for me was, how can I turn this into an experience that brings out the best in me?
That is really powerful.
So again, one example, or same thing, I can use the learning experience kind of idea. How can I turn this into a great learning experience? How can I turn this into a great story to tell at some point in my life? Right? So there's all sorts of things that we can ask ourselves that also promote a sense of resilience.
I like that it seems like part of this resilient mindset has to do that there's some component of curiosity in here, where you're kind of, the questions are more open-ended. You're not coming from a place of judgment or assumption with yourself, but you're wondering kind of like what is possible on, through the experience. Okay.
Absolutely true. Yes.
What are some other really good, just kind of open-ended questions that people can ask themselves when they're trying to identify and connect with the feelings that are coming up? Because if you're an individual who has utilized a lot of those distraction techniques throughout your life, and it's pretty ingrained and entrenched in you, I'm thinking it's probably going to take a little bit of time to shift out of it. So are there some good questions that you'd recommend we could pop up here while you're talking?
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, I wrote a book called 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, and my chapter 4 in that book is literally a list of 35 different ways that people distract themselves. So we probably named probably 5 or 6. People do geographic moves to get away from things. They stay anxious to get away from stuff, and they keep things vague to get away from stuff. They become perfectionistic to get away from stuff. I mean, the list is pretty long, but the key thing is that you start to notice all the different kinds of ways that you distract yourself, and once you do that, you can help yourself choose into being more present and more aware.
We'll put a link to your book up here. That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's, like I said, I think I've identified like 35 different ways.
That's amazing. Is there one that's your favorite?
Is there one?
Like one open?
Well, I don't know that it was not my favorite, but I don't know that I would call any of these my favorites.
Yeah.
But the one that probably is super common that people do is doing what I call either one is the way that I call it transmuting feelings.
Yes.
Or they have a default feeling. They're kind of both sides of a coin. They're really getting at the same thing, but it's two different ways to talk about it. So what happens here is that somebody's default reaction is, let's say, anger, or somebody's default reaction is sadness. So that it doesn't matter what happens, rather than expressing disappointment or sadness or vulnerability or something, or embarrassment that something happened, it just comes out as anger. So the feelings are being transmuted, and there's a default feeling. So I think that's super common, but to me, that both of those are distractions.
If you catch yourself in that camp, then what's a good question just to say to yourself? Like
what other feelings might be taking place here?
Okay.
And then to go to the list of 8. The list of 8 really covers a lot.
Okay, that's good. Many people struggle with letting go and difficult life experiences. And you talk about these experiences being disguised as grief. So what is it, and why is it so important? And what does it take to make sense of these life stories that are being disguised as grief?
Well, I call it actually disguised grief. So that, and there's 2 different ways that I think about what we do with difficult life experiences. And this to me really is the essence of moving through things that have been hard for us in the past that we still are holding on to, or we're still having reactions about, or we won't forgive people, or whatever it might be. So the 2 ways to understand disguised grief are, one, if you hear somebody use what I call grief signal words. So grief signal words sound like resentfulness, bitterness, holding grudges, longstanding anger or hurt, sarcasm, pessimism, cynicism, resentfulness, desire for revenge, feeling revengeful, that all those kinds of things, to me, underneath all of that is grief. And the way to understand, in my world, the way I understand grief is that grief is comprised of, and most people don't talk about this, but grief is comprised of at least 4 of the 8 feelings: sadness, helplessness, anger, and disappointment. So anytime you're individually or collectively experiencing those feelings, you're grieving. So if I'm feeling sad, I'm grieving. If I'm disappointed, there's grief. So that's the second way that I understand disguised grief. I think about from the standpoint of categories. So most of us have had difficult life experiences, and they've come in different forms. So for me, what I'm listening for is how someone may be grieving over something that they got and didn't deserve. So in this case, we're talking about situations of abuse or chaos or neglect, and it doesn't matter what form the abuse is. It's whether it's physical, sexual, or emotional. Chaos, same thing. They got something they didn't deserve. Or it's grieving over what you deserved and didn't get. This is the good. So one's the bad stuff, the other's the good stuff. Praise, support, fairness, consistent, nurturance, all that kind of stuff just wasn't present. All those missed basketball games or swim meets or dance competitions or whatever it is. Progress on making a better grade. Or just sheer love. Let me just love on you. Let me just hold you and tell you how much I love you. Right? So we have grieving over what you got and didn't deserve, what you deserved and didn't get. The next is grieving over what never was. So that's think of that as kind of facts and circumstances of your early life. So lots of lost opportunities. Lots of people grew up in poverty, right? They missed opportunities to do certain things. There's grieving over what is not now. So think of that as facts and circumstances of your current life. And then there's grieving over what may never be. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing light about this. But this is getting at kind of the challenges and the seriousness of our lives. But I think especially making sense of difficult life experiences is the thing that moves us to forgiveness and moving through.
So once you've been able to kind of make sense of it, let's shift gears to the real meaty part of this, and that's the forgiveness component. Like, it's one thing to say to somebody, I forgive you, or even to say to yourself, I forgive myself. It's another thing to actually go through the process, which you encourage us to do, of feeling those feelings and having those feelings be authentic and real, and that experience actually take over us and not have it just be, words because you feel like that's the appropriate thing to do in the situation. And again, you're judging yourself because you feel like you should forgive somebody because that's what you were taught to do, but you don't actually authentically feel it. So can you talk to us about how do we actually go on this journey of actually utilizing the power of forgiveness and, seeing some sort of change in our life through the process of forgiveness?
The essence to me is by being willing to think about the meaning and the impact that these life experiences had on you across time. And each of those elements is important. So the big question that I want people to consider is, who did I become because I went through these experiences? At the time they happened, as I aged, right now. That's the across time piece. Because once you make sense of who you became because you went through given experiences, now you're at a much clearer place of choice. Oh, I don't have to be that anymore. Let's say you were sarcastic and cynical because, and I have my own view of what those mean, but you go, I don't like that part of me. I don't want to do that anymore. But it came out of the experience of whatever was difficult, and you make sense. You walk through that. It's like, oh, I started to get that way after such and such happened. I don't want to be that person anymore. But now you're at a place of choice. But you're at a place of choice because you have increased awareness of how you were impacted by something or what meaning it held for you.
Do you feel that time is an essential component of the forgiveness process? Or is it something that can you speed through it is what I'm curious about?
Well, I don't, it's interesting. I will tell you what popped in my head as you asked that question. I have a friend who has related to me the profound experiences that she had as a child when she grew up, and she was horrible physical abuse and neglect woven into that. And she said she'd done a ton of work with therapy over the years. And when she came to the questions that I was asking, and I raised them in a TED Talk, they're also in the 90 Seconds book. There's like at least 9 questions that I run through for people to start to consider. She said that doing that made more sense to her and felt like it brought her to an even better sense of completion of making what she attempted to do before. So what I can say is that people can move through that process. It's not a matter of rushing through, because we always are going to be in a position of evolving and learning. We can always learn something new even years later. So can somebody use what I'm saying from an event that happened more recently? Yes. Can that make a difference? Yes. And stay open to the possibility that other things may yet surface as time goes on. But stay in those questions. Who did I become? What meaning and impact does this have for me? There's other words I use. Those are the 2 biggest. But what meaning and impact did this have on me? Who did I become because I went through this? And then to consider both all through again this arc of time. When it happened, whatever time has progressed progressed, and then right now. And then you move to the next set. Then the next part of the process is extracting the good, right? So is there any good that's come of this? Children, for instance, who grew up in substance abusing homes, and it's chaotic and uncomfortable, they often get super involved at school, right? And then they become really good students. They study a lot. They're out of the home and they're into extracurricular activities. So now they develop a ton of social skills, but their academics and their social skills lead to scholarships or this, that, or the other in terms of college and beyond, and they become great leaders. Mm-hmm. Now, it came out of difficult circumstances. So There's good to be extracted. Again, is it the thing that we want to recommend? Heck no. But there are ways to understand that even difficult life experiences can have gifts hidden underneath.
It's a really beautiful perspective. I really appreciate that. If you are in the position where you realize you could benefit from forgiving a person, a situation, even yourself.
Yep.
Do you have any recommendations for first steps? If you let's say you're dealing with a lot of internal resistance, but you'd like to get there.
I would say the same kind of thing. Choose choose one experience to start with.
Okay.
Right? Just pick one that is a difficult life experience. Then take yourself through the questions.
Okay.
And you can just use the ones that I raised for you today. Mm-hmm. It's like, what happened? What is the experience? And what impact did this have on me? What meaning do I attribute to it? Who did I become because of it? And then let yourself move through that. There's likely to be all sorts of feelings. Let the feelings be present. And it doesn't mean going to the person that harmed you. This is you doing the work for yourself or with somebody. And then if you kind of get to a point where you go, oh, wait a minute, okay, I think this is the essence of it, then you let yourself see if there's any kind of good pieces that you can take from it. Because like I said, oftentimes there's a gift hidden. and then you move to a place of forgiveness. That's when, in my mind, real forgiveness happens. Because now I can let go. I don't have to stay. Forgiveness means letting go of living in the past. That's really what forgiveness means. And it's for you. It's not for somebody else. The effect happens with others, but it's really for yourself to make choices to no longer live kind of feeding and letting the past insults and injuries fuel your present. So now you move to a place of forgiveness, and the forgiveness is forgiving yourself for what you did or did not know, forgiving yourself for what you did or did not do, and forgiving others for the same thing, forgiving them for what they did or did not know, and forgiving them for what they did or did not do. Then, to me, then you're in a place of going, all right, that now who do I want to become? So that you're now being able to let go of your old life story. It becomes part of the overall narrative of your life, but it doesn't own you in the way it owned you before. And it then allows you to do what I call kind of forging new images of who you want to become. And then you can choose into those and live into those.
That's great. That's ultimately where we want to be, where we free ourselves from the past and those negative experiences, and be able to pull out the gold and the things that are actually of benefit to us through these negative experiences. Once we can understand, like you say, we assign value and meaning to why it happened and what we got out of it that was good. That makes a lot of sense.
Right. So think of it as kind of three really great things that come out of moving through this grief. And that is, it's forgiveness. The second is freeing yourself from your old life story. And the third is being able to forge new images of who you want to become and kind of living into that.
I love that. Joan, this has been just a really fascinating conversation. I so greatly appreciate your time, your wisdom, your insight, all the great work that you're doing on the planet. Do you have any kind of closing words of advice or wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience for the folks out there who are going through the process of grief right now, and they're they're trying to figure out how to embrace these uncomfortable emotions, and they're working through the process of forgiveness? Any kind of words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
They're working through. My thing is, my big thing in this case is just lean into it. It's like backing away from it doesn't work, and it will never work. And you'll still hold if you don't deal with it, you'll still hold it and live off of it. It's becomes that's how you're drawing your life energy. Yeah. And I would rather have you create life energy, right? And so it's like, let yourself move through the stuff that's hard and make sense of what's hard. And that's the stuff that actually really frees you. So it's experiencing and it's expressing ultimately what needs to be experienced and expressed.
Experiencing and expressing. We will aim to do that. That's really good. Joan, you have so many great resources to help people. So will you I'm going to pop all of your links in our show notes, and we'll also add them here. But can you just tell us about your 3 TEDx talks? Because I know our audience is also going to want to go check those out on YouTube and follow you there and listen to your talks.
Yeah, the first talk is Emotional Mastery: The Gifted Wisdom of Unpleasant Feelings. So it's the talk that really outlines kind of the idea around the 8 unpleasant feelings. And again, what if you would listen today, then I would have you understand that the method is important. The 8 feelings are where the real magic is. That's the first one. The second one is Grief: The Pathway to Forgiveness. It's really kind of the last 10 or 15 minutes of our conversation here. It's really capturing the essence of what we talked about. And then the third one is, I'm not a big believer in what's identified as imposter syndrome. So the third is a TEDx conversation. So it's more of a conversation. It's not a straight out presentation. And it's rethinking imposter syndrome.
Cool. And then I understand you have on LinkedIn a learning course that helps support people moving through grief, loss, and change. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Is that a free course? Is that something they need to pay for?
I actually don't know. I know it's free in some circumstances, and I think it's not free in others, but
Okay.
I think the cost is maybe around $10.
Okay. So it's affordable.
Yeah, it's very affordable. And the title of it, I think, has to do with how to deal with grief, loss, and change as an employee. I think we can sort of drop off the as an employee part. It's how to deal with grief, loss, and change. And I actually highlight a number of different things in terms of kind of what grief is. We've talked a little bit about here, but I also talk about this notion of guilt in it, that a lot of people talk about when loss, especially when relational loss happens.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a hidden little piece in there.
Well, good. So we'll put the link there. And then will you, if people are feeling inclined to download your books and your writing, will you also just mention the books again, and we'll pop them up here?
But there's I'll say two of mine. There's a third there. I'll leave that one off. But I wrote a book called Ease Your Anxiety. It's very brief. It's dialed right into kind of how I view anxiety. Some of that same material is contained in my 90 Seconds book. Really, the 90 Seconds to a Life You Love is the key book. The subtitle of that is How to Master Your Difficult Feelings to Cultivate Lasting Confidence, Resilience, and Authenticity. And that really is kind of the thrust of a lot of our conversation today. It'll just deepen one's understanding of what we've talked about. And the process of moving through grief is outlined in chapter 8 of that book.
Okay.
Distractions are in chapter 4 that we talked about. So lots of available information for people.
Awesome. We've got all of your links. So like I said, we'll put those in the show notes. But if people would like to work with you personally, can they do that? Or should they, what are the best ways to connect with you?
If they reach out through at drjoanrosenberg.com, there's, I think, a request for contact or something there, to shoot me a note there. That certainly I can be found on the internet. But drjoanrosenberg.com is kind of the central zone. Whether it's speaking, whether it's individual work or speaking opportunities, those kinds of things, people can certainly reach out to me there.
Great. Joan, this has just been so wonderful. Thank you for everything that you've shared with us today. All of your insights has been really valuable. For those of you out there, if you found this content to be valuable to you, or you know somebody who could really benefit from Joan's message, please do not hesitate to subscribe, like, and share. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, Joan.
You bet. Thanks so much.